The war with the Ravagers had reached its breaking point. Across the galaxy, Earth's colonies were falling, one after another, as the relentless alien invaders swept through with brutal efficiency. Despite humanity's advanced technology, the Ravagers seemed to always be one step ahead. Their fleet was vast, their tactics ruthless. Earth had already sacrificed too much, and yet nothing seemed to stop their advance. With every new victory for the Ravagers, the hope of peace felt further out of reach. Inside Earth's Central Command, the situation was grim. General Mara Voss stood before the holographic map of the galaxy, watching as another colony flickered red, signaling its destruction. Her fingers clenched into fists, her mind racing for any solution, anything that could turn the tide. But as the last report came in from the besieged colony of Vexus 5, a sudden beat broke the silence in the command center. "General, we're picking up something strange," said Lieutenant Juno Ramirez, her voice tight with tension. "It's a signal, encrypted, and it's coming from deep space. It looks like an old transmission." Mora's heart skipped. "Old?" she asked, not sure she'd heard correctly. The Ravagers had wiped out or absorbed most older technology, and anything from deep space was either forgotten or erased from the records. "Run and trace. Is it a Ravager signal?" Ramirez's fingers flew over the console, her brow furrowing as the signal's origin materialized on the display. Zerari frequency. The name hit Mara like a thunderclap. The Zerari. The ancient race of explorers and allies who had once shared humanity's vision of a unified galaxy. Centuries ago, they'd vanished without a trace, leaving behind only scattered ruins on distant worlds. Earth had assumed the Zerari were lost forever, perhaps wiped out by some unknown catastrophe, or worse, by the Ravagers themselves. But now, here was proof that they might still exist. "Is it active? Is it a distress call?" Mara asked, her voice hoarse. Ramirez hesitated, staring at the data before her. "Yes, it's encrypted, but I'm getting definite signs of a distress call. It's old, but it's been activated recently." She paused, looking up. "And it's asking for help. From Earth." The words sent a chill through the room. The Zerari, once Earth's most trusted allies, had disappeared long before the Ravagers made their mark. No one knew why. No one knew where. But their reappearance, even if only in the form of a desperate signal, could mean the difference between life and death for humanity. Mara took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing pulse. "Can we decode it?" "We're trying. It's a complex encryption, but I think we can crack it. It'll take a little time." Ramirez looked back at the general, her eyes filled with concern. "General, if this is true, if the Zerari are still out there, we have to reach them. They were the ones who helped us fight the Ravagers before." Mara nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. The Zerari had been humanity's oldest and most powerful allies, but after they vanished, Earth had forged its own path, leading a galaxy-wide resistance to the Ravagers. The alliance with the Zerari had become a distant memory, one relegated to history books. Now, their reappearance could mean salvation or doom. "If the Zerari are truly alive," Mara said, her voice low, "we need to find them. Immediately." She turned to the rest of the command room, her gaze sweeping over her officers. "We're sending a team. Lieutenant Ramirez, start decrypting that signal. I want every bit of information we can get. Captain Hayes, you'll lead the team. Prepare for immediate deployment." Captain Marla Hayes, standing in the back of the room, stepped forward. Her reputation as a fierce and unflinching leader was known across the galaxy. "Understood, General," she said, her tone resolute. "We'll find them." But as Mara nodded and the team dispersed to prepare for the mission, she couldn't shake the feeling that the signal wasn't just a beacon of hope. It felt like a warning. Something about it felt wrong. Was the Zerari's return a blessing, or had their silence concealed a darker secret? Captain Marla Hayes stood in the briefing room, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. The coordinates transmitted from the mysterious Zerari signal led them to the outskirts of the Galen Expanse, a region of space long thought to be inhospitable. It was a barren stretch of the universe, filled with radiation storms, asteroid fields, and rogue gravity wells that could rip a starship apart. But the Zerari signal was unmistakable, and Hayes knew there was no time to waste. She checked her crew list one final time. Dr. Kara Zane, Earth's top cryptographer, was already aboard, tirelessly working to decrypt the Zerari message. She'd be invaluable, Hayes knew, especially when they arrived at the planet where the signal had originated. It could be their only hope to learn what had become of the Zerari. Lieutenant Juno Ramirez would be navigating, as always, sharp-eyed and quick-thinking. They'd need her skills to get through the treacherous expanse. "We're ready to depart, Captain," Ramirez's voice crackled over the intercom. "Understood," Hayes replied, her mind racing through the potential dangers ahead. "Prepare for launch. I want full systems online, and make sure we're ready for anything." The crew moved quickly. The Peregrine, their sleek, highly maneuverable ship, was a perfect fit for the kind of mission they were about to undertake, fast and agile enough to avoid potential dangers. But even with all the technology at their disposal, no one could predict the dangers lurking beyond the safe confines of known space. Hayes adjusted her collar, bracing herself for the uncertainty ahead. As the Peregrine broke free of Earth's orbit, the vast emptiness of space stretched out before them. The stars shimmered cold and distant, offering no comfort. The journey to the coordinates was going to take days, but time was a luxury they didn't have. Hours turned to days as they ventured deeper into the Galen expanse. The radiation storms came and went, each one a reminder of just how dangerous this part of space was. The crew spent their time preparing for the worst, checking and rechecking their systems, making sure they were ready for whatever the expanse threw at them. But it wasn't the storms that worried Hayes. It was the feeling of being watched, of something lurking in the deep silence of space, just beyond the reach of their sensors. "Captain, we've arrived at the planet." Ramirez's voice finally broke through her thoughts. The planet was smaller than Earth, an unassuming orb cloaked in an atmosphere of swirling clouds, shrouded in a veil of mystery. Nothing about it stood out at first glance, yet something about it felt ancient. The atmosphere seemed to hum with energy, and the readings were strange, as if the planet itself was vibrating with an otherworldly presence. Dr. Zane's voice came through next. I'd decrypted more of the message. "There's an urgent plea for help, but there's something off about it. It's like they were trying to send a warning, but were interrupted midway." Hayes' eyes narrowed. "A warning?" "Yes, Captain. There's a part of the transmission that's cut off. It's like whoever sent the message knew something terrible was coming. I don't think we're the only ones who received it." The hairs on the back of Hayes' neck stood up. If the Zerari had sent this message, there was something they were afraid of, something worse than the Ravagers. But what? "We're not going in blind," Hayes ordered, her mind already planning their descent. "Lieutenant, take us into orbit. Dr. Zane, can you pinpoint any locations of interest?" Dr. Zane worked quickly, her fingers moving across the console. "There's a massive structure on the planet's surface. Captain, I'm guessing it's Zerari in origin. It's in the equatorial region, but the readings are strange. It's like the structure is shielded from our scans." "Shielded?" Hayes repeated. "Get us down there. We need answers." As the Peregrine descended into the planet's atmosphere, the air grew thick with turbulence, the ship's hull creaking under the strain. It was clear that the planet was not as uninhabited as it seemed. Something was watching them, something ancient and powerful. The ship finally broke through the clouds, revealing the immense, half-buried structure. It was massive, thousands of years old, perhaps older. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the whole structure seemed to pulse with energy, as if alive. The team would have to go inside to learn the truth about the Zerari's disappearance. But Hayes knew that the deeper they went, the more they risked awakening whatever secrets the planet held, secrets that may be better left forgotten. "This is it," she said, staring out at the looming structure. "Prepare for landing, stay alert." But as the Peregrine touched down, an ominous rumble shook the planet's surface. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the sky above seemed to darken in response. Something had noticed them. Something ancient, something powerful, and it wasn't happy they had come. The Peregrine shuddered as it settled onto the planet's surface, the ship's landing gear crunching against the rocky terrain. A heavy silence filled the air, broken only by the distant rumble of the planet's atmosphere, as if it, too, was holding its breath. The ancient structure before them loomed like a sleeping giant, its shadow stretching long across the land. Captain Marla Hayes stood up from her seat, her boots clinking softly on the metal floor as she turned to her crew. "Everyone, stay sharp. Dr. Zane, stay by the airlock and continue analyzing the structure. We need to know everything before we make a move," Hayes ordered, her voice steady but firm. Dr. Zane nodded, her fingers tapping rapidly on the console. "Already working on it, Captain. The energy readings are spiking, and the signals are getting Weirder. It's as though the planet itself is reacting to our presence. Lieutenant Ramirez, who had been running a final systems check, turned to Hayes. The ground is unstable. Whatever's down there, it's buried deep. We might trigger something we don't want to. I know, Hayes replied, her gaze hardening. But we don't have a choice. We need answers. The team disembarked in full combat gear, their boots sinking slightly into the dust of the barren world. The air was thin and cold, the sky swirling with ominous clouds that seemed to swirl unnaturally fast, as if stirred by some unseen force. The air itself felt alive, charged with a strange energy that crackled at the edges of their senses. As Hayes and her team approached the entrance, the air around them thickened, a low hum vibrating beneath their feet. The structure seemed almost sentient, alive with energy. Ancient alien symbols covered the surface of the vast stone doors, some glowing faintly as if responding to their presence. A soft pulse of light flickered across the carvings, and for a moment, Hayes thought she saw them shift, almost as though they were moving. "Stay close and stay alert," Hayes ordered as she stepped forward. With a steady hand, Lieutenant Ramirez placed her palm against the door's surface. The symbols flared briefly, then the massive stone doors began to groan, the sound deafening as they slowly slid open. A cold wind blasted out from within, carrying the scent of ancient decay and something far darker. Hayes motioned for her team to move in. They crossed the threshold, entering a vast chamber bathed in eerie light, its walls adorned with even more intricate symbols, symbols that now pulsed with a dark rhythm. The ceiling was impossibly high, stretching out of sight. In the center of the room, a massive, hollowed-out pillar stood tall, its surface etched with the same cryptic markings. "This place, it's alive," Dr. Zane whispered, her voice tense. "What do you mean?" Ramirez asked, her hand resting on the hilt of her blaster. "It's the structure. It's connected to the planet's core somehow, like it's breathing." Dr. Zane's eyes flickered across the symbols. "But it's not just the planet. The whole system seems to be resonating. Something's trying to wake up." Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, followed by a sharp crackling noise. The walls trembled, and the energy from the symbols flared violently. The ground beneath their feet shook, sending vibrations through the air as a crack appeared in the center of the room. "What the hell is that?" Hayes asked, her voice tight. The crack widened, revealing a strange, glowing core buried deep beneath the structure. The light from the core pulsated rhythmically, almost as though it were breathing, waiting for something or someone. "That's not just a power source," Dr. Zane muttered, stepping closer, her face pale. "That's a weapon." A chill ran down Hayes' spine. The signal, the urgency of it, the Zereri's desperate play, everything was leading them here. And now it seemed they had awakened something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The pulsing light intensified, and suddenly, a dark shape moved within the core. Hayes' heart skipped a beat. Something was rising. Without warning, the chamber exploded in a flash of blinding light. The symbols on the walls blazed to life, filling the space with an overwhelming surge of energy. The pillar in the center of the room cracked open, revealing a colossal ancient mechanism beneath. It was a massive, intricately designed machine, its purpose unclear, but its power unmistakable. It hummed with the same resonance as the planet itself, radiating an energy that seemed to pulse with an intelligence of its own. A voice distorted and ancient echoed through the chamber, reverberating in their minds. "The Forgotten Alliance awakens, but the cost is yet to be paid." The crew froze, the weight of the words pressing on their chests. "What did it say?" Ramirez asked, her voice strained. "I'm not sure," Dr. Zane replied, her face ghostly pale. "But I think it was meant for us, or someone else. And I think it means we're not the only ones who've been watching." The ground trembled again, and the chamber began to fill with an unnatural, oppressive silence. Hayes didn't need to hear any more. Something had been unleashed, something far beyond the reach of their understanding. And whatever it was not pleased to have been disturbed. The eerie silence that followed the mysterious voice seemed to stretch on for eternity, the chamber heavy with anticipation. The pulsing light from the core dimmed for a moment before flaring back to life, bathing the room in a haunting glow. The air itself felt charged, as though the very atmosphere was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Captain Hayes' grip tightened on her sidearm as she scanned the room. Her team stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief, every instinct screaming that something terrible was about to happen. The hum of the ancient machine at the center of the room grew louder, a deep, resonating pulse that rattled the very bones of the crew. "We need to get out of here," Hayes said, her voice steady, though the urgency was unmistakable. But just as she turned to signal for an immediate retreat, the floor beneath their feet cracked open with a deafening roar. A massive rift tore through the center of the chamber, and from the black void within, shadows began to rise. It was as if the very darkness had taken form, coalescing into towering figures made of shifting, formless black energy. The air around them seemed to grow colder, heavier, and the shadows pulsed with an unnatural power. The crew backed away instinctively, their weapons raised, but Hayes knew instantly that they were facing something beyond their understanding, something older than time itself. "What in the name of?" Lieutenant Ramirez's voice trailed off as one of the shadowy figures loomed closer. The first of the beings moved, its shape flickering and undulating, as though it were both solid and ethereal at the same time. It was tall, towering over the crew with glowing red eyes that pierced through the darkness. Its form shifted, becoming more defined with each passing second, a silhouette of some ancient warrior. Its limbs elongated and distorted, a cruel parody of life. "Stay back," Hayes barked, raising her blaster and firing a warning shot. The energy bolt hit the shadow, but it passed right through as if the figure were made of smoke. It didn't even flinch. The shadow didn't speak, but the oppressive weight of its presence filled the room, its gaze locking onto Hayes. She felt the chill of its gaze deep in her bones, a sensation like freezing water running through her veins. It was as if the creature was studying her, measuring her very soul. Suddenly, the voice echoed through the chamber again, louder this time, as if the shadows themselves were speaking through it. "The forgotten guardians of the Alliance, the price of awakening is steep." Hayes' pulse quickened as the meaning of the words settled into her mind. These shadows were not merely protectors of some ancient relic. They were the remnants of a lost civilization, remnants of the Zeruri's old allies. And now they were here, awakened by their presence, and demanding something in return. "Captain," Dr. Zane whispered urgently, her fingers flying over her datapad. "The core, it's not just a power source. It's a prison. These beings, they're bound to it. They've been trapped here for centuries." Hayes turned to Dr. Zane, eyes narrowing. "What are you saying? We've freed them." Dr. Zane swallowed hard. "Yes, Captain, and they don't seem pleased." The shadows continued to move, now more numerous, materializing from the rift one by one. Their forms grew more defined, more grotesque, as they surrounded the crew. The hum of the ancient machine grew deafening, and the temperature in the room dropped drastically, the air thick with a strange, suffocating energy. "We need to go," Lieutenant Ramirez insisted, her voice shaking with fear as she backed toward the exit. "This is bad, Captain. We've done something we can't undo." But as Hayes turned to retreat, the ground shifted again and the rift widened. A powerful force shot from the core, sending an invisible wave of energy crashing into them. The crew was thrown backward, slamming into the walls of the chamber with bone-crushing force. Hayes struggled to stand, her head spinning, but she forced herself to her feet. "Everyone get up. Now." The shadows surged forward, their movements swift and fluid, their forms like living darkness. The first figure reached out, its hands stretching toward Hayes, its fingers thin and claw-like, radiating a chill that sank deep into her skin. She fired her blaster, but the energy bolts passed through the shadow as if it were smoke. The creature's cold, dead eyes locked onto hers, and a voice, ancient and malicious, whispered into her mind. "You have awakened us, and now you will see the cost." Before Hayes could react, the world around her began to blur. The shadows seemed to move faster, coalescing into an impenetrable wall of darkness. Her vision wavered, and she felt her mind struggling to hold onto reality as the room spun. "Captain, we have tow." Ramirez's voice was cut off, replaced by an inhuman growl as the shadows closed in. Hayes could feel the presence of the shadows growing stronger, their power surging. They were everywhere, surrounding them, closing off every escape. There was no way out. Then, just as the darkness seemed to overtake them, the machine at the center of the room emitted a blinding burst of light. The shadows recoiled, screeching in agony, as if the light was burning them. For a brief moment, there was a chance, an opening in the chaos. "Move!" Hayes shouted, lunging toward the exit. She didn't know how long the light would last, but it was their only chance. The crew scrambled to their feet, and with the last ounce of strength they had, they ran, stumbling over the uneven ground, desperately making for the ship. But the shadows were not far behind. They were no longer just remnants of an ancient civilization. They were something worse, something alive, something that could follow them beyond this planet. The crew staggered through the entrance, nearly blinded by the searing light from the core as they fled the chamber. Hayes' heart hammered in her chest, the pounding sound drowned by the frantic footfalls echoing in the vast hall. Behind them, the shadows writhed, their forms flickering and shifting in the unnatural light. They were relentless, pursuing them with an eerie speed, their claws reaching out like the tendrils of a nightmare. "We can't outrun them," Lieutenant Ramirez gasped, her breath right. "They're too fast." Hayes glanced over her shoulder, the flickering shapes of the shadows closing in, their eyes burning with a cold fury. They weren't just following them. They were closing in with intent. Whatever these beings were, they weren't just mindless spirits. They had a purpose, and that purpose was them. "Keep moving," Hayes barked, grabbing Ramirez by the arm and pulling her forward. "We need to get back to the Peregrine now, or we're all dead." But as they neared the entrance, a new wave of energy crackled through the air, and the rift in the chamber behind them seemed to pulse violently. The shadows seemed to respond, their movements synchronizing with a powerful surge of energy. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and suddenly, the doorway to the outside seemed to warp and twist, like a mirage evaporating before their eyes. "It's collapsing." Dr. Zane cried out, her voice panicked. "We can't go back the way we came." The walls around them groaned, and the air became thick with static. The structure was coming alive again, the ancient mechanism reacting to their escape attempt. The hum of the core intensified, the ancient machine seeming to feed off their fear and desperation. "Are you telling me we're trapped?" Ramirez shouted, her voice cracking with fear. Hayes gritted her teeth. There was no time to think. They had to find another way out, and fast. "Everyone, to the side," Hayes ordered, her mind racing. She motioned to a series of tunnels that ran along the wall, partially obscured by the collapsing debris. "We'll have to take the side passages. Keep moving." The crew scrambled toward the tunnels, ducking beneath falling stones and debris as the structure seemed to fold in on itself. The shadows were still gaining on them, their forms undulating and contorting like fluid, and Hayes could feel the temperature plummeting as the darkness closed in. Every instinct in her told her to fight back, to try something, but the weapons they had were useless against these beings. It wasn't just a physical battle, it was a battle for their very souls. "Dr. Zane, what's the status on the ship?" Hayes asked, her voice tight with urgency. "I'm trying to access the Peregrine systems remotely, but we're getting interference," Dr. Zane replied, her fingers flying over the datapad. "It's like the planet's energy field is scrambling everything. We might not be able to get through." Hayes cursed under her breath. "Then we'll have to do it the old-fashioned way." They dove into the side tunnel, the walls narrow and jagged. It was difficult to move quickly, but they had no choice. The shadows were closing in, their haunting whispers echoing through the air, growing louder with each passing second. Suddenly, an explosion of light blasted from the core, flooding the passageway with an intense radiance that temporarily blinded them. The shadows recoiled, their bodies writhing in the light, but they were not retreating. Instead, they seemed to be drawing strength from it, their forms growing larger, more solid. "Move faster," Hayes shouted, her voice desperate. They couldn't afford to wait for the light to fade. If they didn't get out of here now, they were done. The passage twisted and turned, the walls tightening as they made their way deeper into the structure. The energy of the planet, now fully awakened, seemed to pulse around them, an ominous reminder that they were not in control here. It was as though the very Earth was conspiring against them, pushing them forward into the unknown. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a larger chamber. It was vast, with high ceilings that seemed to disappear into darkness and ancient symbols etched into the walls. But what caught Hayes' attention was the strange alien device that stood in the center of the room, half buried in the ground, its surface smooth and cold, with more symbols glowing faintly across its surface. "Is this?" Dr. Zane's voice trailed off in disbelief. "It looks like a transport device," Hayes said, her mind racing. "We might be able to use it to get back to the ship." "I'm not sure we have a choice," Zane replied. "The energy signatures are overwhelming. Whatever this is, it's connected to everything. The planet's core, the shadows, everything." Before they could investigate further, a terrible screech filled the room, followed by the crushing sound of the shadows tearing through the walls. The energy in the room surged violently, and the floor beneath them began to tremble once more. "Too late," Hayes muttered. The shadows had found them again. One of the figures emerged from the darkness, its towering form more solid than ever before. It glared at Hayes with burning red eyes, and its voice boomed through the chamber, echoing in their minds. You cannot escape the cost of awakening. Hayes' heart pounded as she quickly analyzed their options. The device in the center of the room could be their only hope, but it wasn't activated. There was no time for hesitation. Get to the device, she shouted. Now. The crew rushed forward, weapons ready, but Hayes knew that their time was running out. Whatever ancient force was tied to these beings, it was coming for them, and the cost was higher than they could have ever imagined. The shadows closed in with unnatural speed, their forms twisting and shifting as if the very fabric of reality was bending around them. Hayes' pulse hammered in her ears, the crushing weight of the situation bearing down on her. Every step toward the alien device seemed like a futile struggle, the walls of the chamber narrowing and the oppressive presence of the shadow figures growing stronger by the second. The ancient device in the center of the room hummed with a strange, almost imperceptible energy, its surface alive with shifting patterns and symbols. It looked like a portal or perhaps a mechanism of some kind that could bend the very space around them. But no one on the crew had the faintest idea how to activate it. They had no time for questions, no time for hesitation. Cover us, Hayes shouted, her voice fierce, as she sprinted toward the device. Get to it now. Lieutenant Ramirez, her face grim with resolve, raised her weapon and fired a burst of energy at the nearest shadow. The blast passed through it as though the creature was nothing more than smoke, but the creature hesitated for a moment, flickering in the light. It wasn't much of a defense, but it gave the team a precious few seconds to reach the device. Hayes' boots thudded against the cold stone floor as she reached the alien structure. She knelt beside it, her fingers brushing the strange symbols etched into its surface. The device was unlike anything she had ever seen. It didn't respond to conventional commands, no buttons or levers to press, no obvious interface to interact with. Dr. Zane, she said, her voice urgent, can you read anything? Can you make sense of this? Zane was already at her side, her fingers flying over her datapad, her brow furrowed in concentration. The device emitted a low hum, and her pad began to flicker erratically as if trying to connect with something. Her eyes widened as she studied the readings. This is a dimensional transport system, she said, her voice trembling. It's designed to open a gateway to another place, but the energy it's unstable. If we don't activate it properly, it could tear us apart. Hayes felt a wave of cold dread wash over her. The shadows were closing in, their presence suffocating, their forms becoming more tangible with every passing moment. They were already too close. We don't have a choice, Hayes snapped, her mind racing. We'll have to risk it. She turned back to the device, her hand tracing the strange markings. As her fingers brushed over one of the symbols, the hum of the device grew louder, and a brilliant light began to shine from within. The walls of the chamber trembled, and the shadows shrieked, their forms writhing in agony as if the very light was burning them. It's working, Zane cried out, her eyes wide with disbelief. It's opening a gateway. The ground beneath them rumbled violently, and the very air around them seemed to bend and warp. Hayes grabbed Zane's arm, pulling her away from the device as it began to glow brighter. She could feel the power building, the energy gathering around them, and she knew that this was their only chance. We need to move now, Hayes shouted. Lieutenant Ramirez fired another burst of energy at the advancing shadows, but this time the blast seemed to have no effect. The shadows surged forward, their forms now solid and relentless. The first of the creatures lunged toward them, its claws reaching out with terrifying speed. Move! Hayes screamed as the portal flickered with a sudden surge of energy. The gateway was unstable, its edges flickering like a damaged screen, but it was open. It was their only escape. With no time left to think, Hayes grabbed Dr. Zane's arm and shoved her toward the portal. The rest of the team followed, their movements frantic as they rushed toward the shimmering gateway. The shadows howled in fury behind them, their bodies stretching and contorting. But the light from the device seemed to repel them, forcing them back. Just as Hayes reached the portal's edge, the air around them grew thick with an oppressive pressure. The shadows were closing in faster than she could run, their claws grazing the edges of her uniform. Her heart raced, and her breath came in ragged gasps. Get in, Hayes shouted, pushing Zane through the portal first. The instant Dr. Zane crossed the threshold, a powerful force gripped Hayes, pulling her forward with an inescapable force. She stumbled, barely able to keep her footing, but there was no turning back. The shadows were too close. With a final glance toward the closing rift in the chamber, Hayes leaped forward, her body sucked into the light. For a moment, the world around her shattered into a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes, as if the very fabric of spacetime was unraveling. Her vision blurred, and the sound of the shadows' howls faded into nothingness. Then, as suddenly as it had all begun, the world stabilized. Hayes collapsed onto a hard surface, gasping for air. She felt the cold, biting wind against her skin, the scent of salt water and ozone filling her lungs. Slowly, she opened her eyes, and the sight that greeted her was both a relief and a shock. They were on a beach. The sand beneath them was white and untouched, stretching out as far as the eye could see, the sky overhead a brilliant azure with no sign of the turmoil they had just escaped. The air was warm and alive with the scent of the ocean. But as Hayes rose to her feet, she realized with a sudden chill that they were not alone. Far in the distance, beyond the edge of the beach, massive, ancient structures rose from the horizon, monolithic spires that towered into the sky, each one pulsing with a strange, ethereal light. And, more unsettling, a single figure stood near the edge of the water, watching them. It was a humanoid figure, cloaked in robes, with eyes that gleamed like stars, its presence both serene and foreboding. Hayes felt a sinking sensation in her gut. Whatever world they had just entered, it was far from a sanctuary. It was just another stage in their increasingly perilous journey. The wind howled through the tall, swaying grasses at the edge of the beach, carrying with it a chill that bit at the crew's skin. Hayes stood frozen, eyes locked on the figure that loomed at the water's edge. It was tall, humanoid, and its movements were almost too fluid, too deliberate, as though it was not simply standing there, but observing, waiting. The others slowly gathered around her, their faces a mixture of confusion and caution. Dr. Zane was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Where are we?" she whispered, her gaze darting from the figure to the eerie spires in the distance. Hayes didn't answer immediately. Her focus was fixed entirely on the cloaked being. There was something ancient about its presence, as though it had been here for eons, untouched by the passage of time. The figure's eyes, those glowing orbs that pulse like stars in the night, seemed to burn through her, piercing the depths of her soul. "Stay alert," Hayes finally said, her voice low but firm. "We don't know who or what this is, but we're not alone." Lieutenant Ramirez stepped forward, her hand instinctively going to the sidearm at her hip. Should we approach or wait? Before Hayes could respond, the figure began to move. It glided toward them, its footsteps leaving no trace in the sand, as though it was floating just above the ground. The crew instinctively took a step back, ready for anything. The tension in the air was palpable, and each of them seemed to hold their breath, anticipating some kind of revelation or confrontation. When the being was just a few meters away, it stopped. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity before it finally spoke, its voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to echo not just in their ears, but in their minds. "You have crossed the threshold," it said, its voice rich with an ancient authority. "The path you have chosen is fraught with peril. Yet, you are not the first to seek it. Many have come before you, and many have failed." Hayes' heart skipped a beat. The figure knew who they were, and more importantly, it knew their purpose. "We're not here to fail," Hayes said, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. "We're here to find answers. The shadows that chased us, the device you hold is connected to them. We need to know what it is and how to stop them." The figure's glowing eyes seemed to flicker with something akin to amusement, though its expression remained unreadable beneath the hood. For a moment, it said nothing, studying them as if weighing their very souls. "The shadows are not the enemy you think they are," it said finally, its voice almost a whisper. "They are not of this world. They are the guardians of an ancient truth, one that you are not yet ready to understand." Hayes narrowed her eyes, trying to comprehend the figure's words. "Then help us understand," she demanded. "Help us stop whatever it is that's coming." The figure's head tilted slightly, and, for a brief moment, Hayes thought she saw a flicker of something almost human, in the glowing depths of its eyes. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the expression was gone, replaced by a cold, implacable stare. "To understand the shadows," the being said, "you must first understand the history of this world. The truth you seek lies not in the device you activated, but in the past that was buried long ago." "History?" Zane echoed. "Buried?" What do you mean? The figure extended one long, pale hand toward the distant spires, their massive structures rising like silent sentinels against the horizon. The ruins you see are the remnants of a once great civilization. They built the device you activated. They were the first to wield the power of the stars. Hayes followed the figure's gesture, her gaze fixed on the towering structures. They were older than anything she had ever seen. Older than any known civilization in the galaxy. And yet, they felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. But they were not the last, the Bing continued, its voice growing more solemn. Their downfall came when they reached too far. They sought to control the forces beyond their understanding, and in doing so, they unleashed the shadows. The shadows are not just protectors, they are the consequence of their ambition. Hayes' mind raced. She glanced at her crew, each of them equally stunned by the revelations. The shadows, then, were not merely some random enemy. They were tied to this ancient race, to their hubris and their attempt to control the very fabric of reality itself. If we stop the shadows, we stop their creators, Hayes murmured, more to herself than to the others. But she wasn't sure if the being had heard her. It had already turned its gaze back to her, its intense stare unwavering. To stop them, the figure said, you must first seek the heart of the ruins. There lies the key to ending their reign. But beware, the truth will not come without sacrifice. Many will fall before the end, and not all will survive the cost of knowledge. Hayes felt the weight of the warning settle over her. The figure's cryptic words hung in the air like a heavy fog. This wasn't just a mission to save the galaxy. It was a journey into the heart of an ancient, forgotten past, and the price for that knowledge might be higher than any of them were prepared to pay. Where do we go from here? Ramirez asked, her voice steady, but with the unmistakable tremor of uncertainty. The figure's eyes gleamed brighter for a moment, and it pointed toward the towering spires in the distance. To the heart of the past, it said, where the shadows were born. Only there can you hope to learn the truth and end the cycle. With that, the being turned away, its cloak billowing behind it as it faded into the horizon. The crew stood in stunned silence, the enormity of what lay ahead settling over them like a dark cloud. Hayes glanced at the others, her resolve hardening. Let's move out, she said. We have a long journey ahead. The journey toward the towering spires was long and treacherous. The sands beneath their boots seemed to stretch on forever, and the landscape became more alien with every step. The air around them grew heavy with an oppressive stillness, and every sound, every breath, seemed to echo through the vast emptiness. The distant spires loomed ever closer, their jagged silhouettes casting long shadows over the desolate terrain. Hayes led the way, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. There was something about this place, something that made her skin crawl. It felt as if the very land itself was waiting, holding its breath as if it knew it was coming. The warnings from the Watcher echoed in her mind. The truth will not come without sacrifice. She pushed those thoughts aside. There was no room for fear now. Their mission was clear. They had to find the heart of the ruins, discover the truth, and stop the shadows, no matter the cost. As they approached the first of the spires, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. The immense structure stretched up into the sky, its surface covered in intricate alien markings that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. The walls were smooth, impossibly perfect, as if crafted by hands far beyond anything humanity had ever known. They could feel the power radiating from the spire, ancient, dormant energy, waiting to be awakened. We're here, Hayes said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Now we find the heart. They moved cautiously toward the entrance, an enormous archway at the base of the spire. The doors were closed, but there was no visible lock or mechanism. Hayes reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the doors began to shift, the massive stone slabs moving effortlessly apart to reveal a dark interior. Inside, the air was thick with an ancient, almost tangible energy. The walls were lined with carvings that depicted scenes of a civilization at its height, scenes of grandeur and triumph, but also of destruction. A warning, perhaps, of what had gone wrong. We're not alone, Lieutenant Ramirez muttered, her hand tight around the grip of her weapon. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and a shadow seemed to shift in the corner of their vision, just beyond reach. They stepped further into the spire, the darkness around them deepening. A faint light began to glow ahead, drawing them in like moths to a flame. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves standing in a vast circular chamber. In the center of the room stood a massive altar, its surface covered in strange symbols. At the heart of the altar was a pulsing, crystalline structure that seemed to hum with the same energy they had felt throughout the ruins. Hayes stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The heart of the ruins, the source of everything. As she reached out to touch the crystal, the entire chamber trembled, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The air grew thick, charged with energy, and a terrible guttural sound filled the space, like a roar from deep within the earth. The crystal flared to life, its light blinding, and in that moment, everything around them seemed to warp and twist. Suddenly, the shadows that had been lurking at the edge of their perception surged forward, their forms materializing out of the darkness. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were tangible, monstrous, their claws gleaming and their eyes filled with an ancient fury. "They found us!" Zane shouted, her voice filled with panic. The creatures closed in with terrifying speed, their movements fluid and precise. Hayes raised her weapon, but before she could fire, the crystal flared even brighter, casting a burst of light that forced the shadows back. The shadows writhed and screamed, their forms flickering and distorting as if the light was burning them alive. The light from the crystal grew stronger, flooding the room with its radiance, and Hayes felt a strange pull, as if the crystal was calling to her. She took a step forward, drawn by an unseen force. "Wait!" Ramirez shouted. "We need tow." But it was too late. The crystal's light enveloped Hayes completely, and in an instant, she was transported into a vision of the past. She saw the civilization that had once called this place home, their rise and their fall. She saw their ambition, their desperation to control the stars, to harness the power of the universe itself. And she saw the moment when everything went wrong, when they had opened a rift they could not close, unleashing the shadows that had haunted them ever since. The vision shifted, and Hayes saw the true purpose of the device they had activated. The gateway was not just a transport system. It was a trap, a way to draw in those who sought the truth and bind them to the ancient mistake that had nearly destroyed this world. "Hayes!" Zane's voice cut through the vision, and suddenly, Hayes was back in the chamber, the light from the crystal still blinding. She blinked, her mind reeling from what she had just witnessed. The shadows were no longer retreating. They were closing in again, more relentless than before. But this time, Hayes understood. "This isn't just about stopping the shadows," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We have to close the rift. We have to end what they started, once and for all." She turned to the crystal, determination hardening in her chest. This was the moment. The heart of the ruins was the key, but it was also the final test. To stop the shadows, to save everything, they had to make the ultimate sacrifice. As the shadows surged forward, Hayes raised her hand toward the crystal, feeling the energy surging through her. With a final, decisive move, she pressed her palm against its surface. The light exploded, consuming everything around them. When the light faded, Hayes was standing alone. The ruins were gone. The shadows were gone. The only thing left was the silence, a profound and empty stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. But Hayes knew they had succeeded. The galaxy was safe.